good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the DxO webinar on making silver halide photos. We'll explain a little bit more what this means as we get going here. I'm your host, PhotoJoseph. If you haven't encountered me before, I am a photographer, filmmaker, YouTuber. I'm all over the place. And if you like what you see today, there are going to be more webinars like these, but each one is unique, going out throughout the rest of this month. We're about halfway through a cycle of a whole bunch of these right now. And if you go to the Nick Collection website, nickcollection.dxo.com/webinars, you can see all the other ones there that you might want to sign up for. A quick little shout out. I want to make sure that you guys can see and hear me, and you should be able to see my screen by now as well. I see a lot of people in the chat already. Hello in Seattle and everywhere else. Hey, the audio says the webinar will begin shortly. Well, it's just begun. It started at on the hour promptly. Thank you very much. Winnipeg, and where's the link to all the, is there a link to all the webinars? Yes, yes, yes. Again, the link to the webinars is, in fact, let me do this. Let me pop this into the chat. This will be a good test because I am going to need this later. If you go to, what did I say? What did I just say? Oh yeah, Nick Collection. Nick Collection. Oh, that's funny. I'm trying to type in a // and this is turning it into a divide by symbol. Okay, I guess I can't type that in. nickcollection.dxo.com/webinars. So I have just sent this link in the chat. Do me a favor real quick, make sure that that's working because I am going to send you some other links later, and I want to make sure that those do come through to you all. In the meantime, while we're doing this webinar, you can, I see a bunch of yeses to see and hear me fine. Thank you very much. Somebody says, don't have your screen yet. Don't see screen. Okay, let's make sure. Let's just turn that off and back on. I turned it on before I started, which is not normally the way this works. Which is not normally the way I did it, but in the past, oh, there we go, showing main screen. Okay, now it's working. Perfect, you should be seeing my screen. Now, again, please confirm. I'm trying a couple little tweaks differently, trying to make this a little bit more efficient. Doesn't always work out as planned, does it? Anyway, if you have, everybody sees it now, great, thank you. And the chat works, thank you, Penelope. Okay. If you have questions throughout this at any time, drop them into the questions area that as many of you are dutifully chatting into right now, and I will be answering them as we go. I'm not going to just wait until the end. I will be going back there whenever there's a pause while I'm waiting for something to render, reply, whatever. I will be jumping into the questions often, and hopefully we'll have some time at the very end for a bit of direct Q&A as well. With that said, let's get started, shall we? Now I'm going to start by showing you the photo that we're working with, explaining a little background on this, and then we're going to get into the silver halide part of this discussion, and I will explain a little bit more of what's happening there. So to start, I have this photo, this lovely portrait here, this lovely lady, and we're going to make a black and white out of this. This is a raw file that has already been opened into Photoshop as a smart object and retouched a bit. In fact, if I double click on the smart object here and open it up, it opens back into Camera Raw. If you are not familiar with using smart objects in Photoshop, they're fantastic because essentially a smart object is a container. It is a file within a file. You can open up the smart object, the file that's within the other file, and you can edit it completely independently. And everything you do in there is separate. Save it, close it, and go back to the host file, and you have that. Everything you did to that one just sitting there as if it's a rendered out file, rendered out image. Very, very powerful. It also allows you, and this is what's most interesting for this presentation, it also allows you to go back and change the filters. Whenever you add a Nick Collection filter to a smart object, then it automatically becomes a smart filter, which means you can go back in and change it at any time you want. You may have seen before when you are working in Photoshop and you apply a standard filter to it. Once you've applied it, that's it. There's no going back. I mean, you can undo, but you can't go in 3 steps later and change, let's say, the amount of blur that you applied unless it is a smart filter. And so by creating a smart object, we have that. Now, this is, again, a raw file that was brought in to Adobe Camera Raw and then it's created, saved as a smart object. And I'm actually going to show you that step a little bit later, just in case you're unfamiliar with that. But this one right now is a smart object. When I open it up, you'll see that the picture itself basically looks the same in here. Actually, of course, it looks the same yet. We haven't turned anything off yet. But if I zoom into this a little bit, we'll see that there's quite a bit of retouching that I've already done. Now, one could argue, and turn on the retouching here so you can see all the pins on our face where I've done retouching. One could argue that it is actually easier to do the retouching after you've rendered the file out because you have things like the patch tool inside of Photoshop that you can't do onto a smart object. But for these things, there were just little skin spots, a few stray hairs. I just did it in here, which means I can go in and change this at any time. So for example, let's find a nice big one on here. There's a patch that's probably removing a hair. If I was to delete that, then yep, sure enough, we can see that hair come back. So you have, just hit undo real quick to bring that back, you have the ability to do that kind of retouching in Camera Raw, which is effectively almost all the same tools that you have in Lightroom, just in case you were wondering about that. Anyway, let me zoom back out of here. And the other thing that you'll notice is that this photo was shot landscape. It's a wider photo. However, I am using a vertical crop of that. And there is a very specific important reason for that you will see momentarily. So let's go ahead and hit OK to bring us back into the main canvas here, the main file. And here again on the right, we see under the layer stack that this is the raw smart object. Okay, so this is cropped. If I grab this picture, I've got the move tool. If I grab it and move it, you can see the full file. So you can see that not only am I cropped into it, I've also rotated the file just a little bit. I'm going to hit undo there. I've straightened it out a little bit. That back fence line was a little bit too crooked for my liking, so I straightened it out a little bit. Okay, so that's it. So this file is now prepped and ready to go into Analog Efex Pro. So make sure that that object is selected. Go to the filter menu under Knit Collection, right at the top, Analog Efex Pro 2. And immediately you're going to see something that's quite interesting here, and that is that this entire effect is being applied not just to the cropped image that we're looking at, but to the whole file. Take a quick look over here to the questions. Rosalind, don't have the screen yet. Rosalind, if you don't have the screen yet, it is in there somewhere, so you may have to toggle your view. Sorry, but everybody else does apparently have it. How would this, Robert's asking, how would this workflow differ if starting in Lightroom instead of CC? From Lightroom, you can send to Photoshop, and you can even send it as a smart object, which is really cool. If you are working in Lightroom, sorry, let me back up. That is for Lightroom Classic. If you're working in Lightroom Classic, then you can send a photo to Photoshop as a smart object. That capability does not yet exist in Lightroom CC. So you have two different workarounds. I'm going to go through this quickly because I've talked about this in previous webinars. I've actually written a blog post on this on the DxO blog website. But effectively what you can do is either simply hit Command E, which will edit in Photoshop. It renders, rasters everything that you've done in Lightroom and brings a TIFF file into Photoshop, which you can then turn back into a smart object, but it doesn't go back to the raw level. It's just a smart object now for the benefit of smart filters. Or you can export the raw file, which will contain the sidecar next to it that has all the Lightroom instructions. Then go into Photoshop, open that raw file. It will see all the instructions that you've done, and now you've got a raw file in Adobe Camera Raw with all the work that you did in Lightroom CC applied to it. So it's multiple extra steps, but you can get there. So that's the short version of that. Okay, Diana says, I'm speaking too fast. I'm sorry, I do talk fast. I talk fast and I move fast. We got a lot to cover. I'll try to slow it down a little bit, but no promises. Okay, so I've opened this up and it says right here, warning, Analog Efex Pro has identified the active layer as a smart object. It's kind of funny it says warning because that's a good thing. I want this. Good, thank you very much. That again will allow me to re-edit the filter at any time. So now that this is open, you can see that we are not looking at the vertical crop of the image. We're looking at the whole picture and we're even seeing it rotated a little bit. Okay, well, you know, that's fine, right? I mean, I can apply the effect, like let's just say I was going to do this effect here, and that would bring me back into Photoshop and I'd have it cropped out and that'd be fine. And in many cases, that would be fine. But in many cases, possibly even more cases, it's not. And let me show you what I mean. I'm going to open up the preset. So incidentally, if you're not yet familiar with Analog Efex Pro, if you've never seen it, a very brief tour of this. You have on the left-hand side your presets, and this is one category of presets. Up at the top, you have different tool combinations, different categories of presets for different types of cameras. The whole idea behind Analog Efex Pro is we are trying to make our photos look analog, look like they were done in film. And there's a lot of these different presets in here, from very classic, very traditional, very normal type of film looks to all kinds of vintagey looks and scratched up films and old-fashioned things and so on. Lots of fun stuff to play around with in here. Encourage you to play with it. We're going to be focusing on one particular category, and that's black and white today. Just a quick continuing through the tour. Down at the bottom of the left-hand side, you'll see you have a custom place, a custom preset list, which we are actually going to be using today. You can import presets in here as well, and there is a history of palettes. You can go back through everything that you may have done, and then there's the help menu down there as well. On the right-hand side, you have all of the adjustments that you make, and you're going to quickly figure out how this works as we go about it. But in brief, one thing I do want to show you is you do see on here 1, 2, 3, 4 different types of adjustments that are being applied. If I go back over here to the left, you'll see that there are a bunch of additional tools that I can add, and the way you can just click on one of these to add it, but it's going to replace everything that's on the right. So what you really do is you want to go over here to where it says build a camera, open up the camera kit, and then from here you can add any of these you want. So let's just say I wanted to add bokeh to this. I click the little plus and it adds the bokeh filter into the stack in there, which is pretty cool. Down in the bottom right, you'll see there is a dialog that says loop and histogram. It's by default closed, but I'm going to leave this open because I am going to need this. And you can swap between a loop for looking at something really close up or the histogram view, which is what I want to use. If we go back to the histogram, that's where I'm going to be. Okay, so let's start with one of the black and white presets. So I go to black and white and I'm going to choose the first preset here. And right away, we're going to see why working with this full image doesn't always work. This particular preset is applying a frame. And look over here on the right hand, on the side of the image here, you can see that the frame is not being applied to the cropped image. It's not even being applied to the full image in its original orientation. It's effectively being applied to the entire frame of what we're looking at now. So where we have this transparent area, this frame here is trying to extend around the whole frame of the file here. So you can see here how it's getting cut off, so that's a little bit weird. So that tells us right away, if we add a border to this picture, if I add vignetting to the picture, anything that I add is going to be added to the frame, let's call it the canvas that we're working in, and not the original photo, and certainly not the original cropped photo, which is what I really want. So with that in mind, I'm going to cancel out of here and we're going to do a couple steps to ensure that this is working the way that I actually want it to. Now, the way that I'll do that is by trimming the photo. I've got my bigger file. I need to trim away, throw away all the extra information so that all that the filter gets is what I'm looking at right here. Thing is, I'm not willing to give up all that data quite yet. I might want to go back to it at some point. So I'm going to be very cautious about it, and I'm actually going to duplicate the smart object. So just go over here and I'll hit Command J to duplicate that. I'll even call this one my backup so that I know that I can go back to that at any time. Now I also want to, rather the next step is to render this out as rasterize it out, it's called, so that it's no longer a smart object, it's just these pixels, so that I can trim it. If I hit trim right now, it's actually not going to do anything because it's a smart object. It can't trim the file, it can only trim pixels. But before I do that, there's one more thing that I want to check. I almost always want to work in 16-bit when I'm working in Photoshop. It's very rare that I would say, it's okay, I'll work in 8-bit. Even if I don't think I'm going to use 16 bits worth of data, I want to make sure that I've got a little bit more elbow room. You think of the 16 bits as like a 16-lane highway. If you got an 8-lane highway and you've only got enough cars to fill up that highway, you're fine. You start getting too many cars on there and some of them are going off the edge. Okay, maybe that's a bad analogy, but point is that it's not enough lanes, there's not enough of a path in there. I want to make sure I've got plenty of space to move around, and that means I can push my shadows, push my highlights, and do more than I could with an 8-bit file, and I just want to be sure. So with that in mind, I'm going to convert this to a 16-bit file. So I go up here to the image menu and I go to mode, and it's RGB, but it's currently an 8-bit. Now I set this to 16-bit, but here's the thing. I am not magically converting the photo that's in here to 16-bit. In fact, because it's a smart object, I'm not converting anything that has to do with that file. Remember, the smart object is a file within a file. I'm not doing anything to it. So I need to convert that to 16-bit as well. And it's important to do both in here. So I'll go over to my backup here. I'm going to double click on that guy, open it up, and we can see down here at the bottom, sure enough, it says it's an RGB 8-bit file. Now, as soon as I click it to open it, it automatically switches it to 16-bit. A little bit of an anomaly here, and I don't know if this is a bug or what, but it says 16-bit. If I hit OK right now, it still says 8-bit down here at the bottom. It hasn't switched it. So what I found you have to do is actually go in here and just say 8-bit, just kidding, 16-bit. And now when I click OK, there we go. Now it has changed to 16-bit. So I don't know why, just a bug, I guess, or some weird thing, but make sure that if you're doing this, you do that. Now, if you are opening the file to begin with, the first time you open a raw file, and again, we're going to do this in a moment, you would check to make sure that's 16-bit at that point before you ever continued. I actually did this deliberately so that I could show you the process of changing that. Okay, now I hit OK. It re-renders that out as a 16-bit file inside of a 16-bit file. Excellent. Now we can move on. So this is two smart objects, right? My original backup and my new one. Now I need to rasterize this. So I right click and I choose rasterize. Now it's just pixels. And then I can go to the image layer and choose trim. Trim is going to cut off everything that is not currently visible. So I hit OK, it trims this out, and I can verify it by simply dragging the file, and we can see that that is all that is left. Undo, and now I'm ready to go back to the filters. But wait, remember, I want to be working with a smart object. Working with a smart object will allow me to re-edit the filter at any time. So once again, I'm going to right-click on this layer and choose Convert to Smart Object. Now, this is not magically returning it back to a raw file. It is simply taking those pixels and loading them inside of another file, which is now inside of this file. Remember, a smart object is just a file within a file. So it's now built that up so that I can work with a smart filter. So now finally I can go back into my filter and I can get busy in here. Let's see if there's any questions while I'm waiting for this. What about DNG files, Carl? Well, it says the DNG file will open fine in Lightroom, in Photoshop, of course, so you can continue working on. Once it's open, the file format, whether it's PSD, TIFF, DNG, whatever, is irrelevant. Alrighty. Now let's move on to here. Someone else asking me to slow down. It's the first time I've gotten 2 slowdowns in one session. I will try. Okay, oh, it's still loading in here. All right, so as I said before, I'm going to go to black and white. Oh, and I probably should mention for anyone who does miss anything, you will be getting an email about 24 hours after this webinar ends with a link to the video so you can watch a recording of the whole thing. So if you do miss something, it will be there. Okay, I'm in my black and white presets. I have in here a bunch of different presets. Some of these are pure black and white. Some of them have color casts like the one you're looking at now does. And considering that what I really want to do here is make a silver print, I don't want color casts on this. So let's talk about the silver print for a moment here. You can ignore the screen. I'm not going to do any screen things for a moment here. Actually, that's a lie. I'm going to go to a web page. We're talking about silver halide. That is what this seminar has been called. It's been called silver halide film, but that's a little bit of a misnomer. I didn't name it. It's a little bit of a misnomer because all film has silver. It's really about silver halide print. Now, making a silver print is a specific type of print. It is a chemical process only. This isn't something you can do on your inkjet printer. This is a chemical process. Going back to the old days, it's the original form of printing, really, and it is beautiful and is very archival. Silver halide prints actually have silver, real silver, like you'd wear in jewelry, have real silver in them, and they look like it. You put one of these on the wall, you shine a light at it, and it just practically glows. It is absolutely gorgeous. So with that in mind, I'm sure a lot of people would like to know more about silver halide process. So let me load this up into the chat. Let me paste in my URLs. There we go. So I've just sent you 4 websites. Just copy and drop these up in somewhere so that when the webinar ends, you don't lose them. I'm going to show you these websites very, very quickly here. 4 web pages that I've shown you. The first one is an Ilford photo website. Ilford is one of the manufacturers of silver halide paper. They're probably one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known. And this web page that I sent you here, that just disappeared. That was weird. This web page that I've sent you that has just disappeared. I've never seen that happen before. Let's try that again. Will tell you a bit about the silver process, which is it's just educational. It's interesting. The second one is this article called Silver Gelatin Photography, the Medium That Changed the World. This is a bit more information about the silver process from film through paper. The reason that I'm sharing this with you is if you are going to actually make a silver halide print from a digital file, which you can do, we'll get to that in a moment, it's very interesting to understand the process of what's happening in here so that when you're prepping your file, you can keep this in mind about what is going to be silvery and what is not. It's just education, I think, very, very interesting. The next 2 links that I've included here are printing companies. Now, I have not used either one of these companies, but these are 2 print companies that do actual chemical process silver halide prints from digital files. One's called the Darkroom. They've got over 40 years of experience. The other one is called DSI, or Digital Silver Imaging. The reason I included both, the Darkroom one, it says here they only do prints up to 10 by 15, which is pretty small, but they've been around for a really long time. DSI does prints all the way up to 50 inches by 120 inches. So huge, huge prints in here. So if you're looking for that big, gorgeous black and white silver print, I definitely recommend you check these guys out. Now, on both of these web pages, both of them have an FAQ in here that talks about how to prep your file. And this is really important because if you are going to create a black and white image, you want to make sure that you send the right type of file to the printer. And if you look over here, there's here it is under category 3, how should my files be set up for black and white silver gelatin prints? And it doesn't give you a whole lot of information here, but it tells you that you want a black and white JPEG. I think the other one says you can send them a TIFF if you want to. The one bit of caution in here says make sure your monitor isn't too bright, as most monitors are too bright at their default settings, especially Apple monitors. So what happens if your screen is too bright is you misjudge how bright your image should be, and then when you get your print, it doesn't look right. The way to keep that from being a problem is to study and monitor your levels very, very closely. And we're going to take a look at that when we get back into the plugin. So there's those two websites. Or those 4 websites. I just wanted to share those with you. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about the actual process of what's happening here. And I don't want to go into a big, huge lecture on film history here, but I think it's a very interesting bit of understanding, bit of knowledge to have, so that when you are prepping your files, when you are designing your black and white, crafting that black and white image, that you are doing it with the knowledge of how it's going to end up. So this mini lecture will start with going back to the film process. Now, many of you may already know this if you've shot film in the old days, but many of you may not. So if you have never shot film before, you probably still know that if you were making a print was made from something called a negative. A negative is an inverse, it is the negative, literally, of the image that you saw. So everything that was black is white on the negative, everything that was white is black on the negative. The way this whole thing was made is through the same silver halide, silver conversion process that happens when you make the silver halide print. So in brief, and I'm really kind of glossing over it here, but you have this celluloid, the film, that is just basically blank clear plastic that has this chemical on it that is reactive to light. When light hits the chemical, it turns into silver. The longer the light hits the chemical, or the more light that hits that chemical, the more it converts to silver, the more silver it gets, until it gets to a point where it's so much silver that it becomes black, it becomes dark. Anything where light doesn't hit stays clear, stays unexposed. Anything that where light does hit becomes black. So if you think about this, this is how your negative is made. So just imagine, if you will, you take your camera and you have a dark room and a spotlight shining right at the camera. So you point it at it so you can see the spotlight and then a bunch of black around it. In the real world, you have black outside, white on the inside. When you take the picture, that white on the inside, the light, is exposing the negative, and that is getting darker and darker and darker the longer it's exposed, or the brighter the light is. The dark outside is shining no light onto the negative, so that's not changing. So the end result is, once you go through the chemical process of developing the film, is that the center area is black and the outside area is white, which is the exact opposite of what the scene was in the real world. Now, when you go to make a print, the same thing happens, but it's in reverse. So in the dark room, a enlarger projects light through the negative onto the paper, which is now your film, if you will. It is, it's the same essential chemical process, but it's mounted to paper, adhered to paper instead of to celluloid, to the transparent film. And when the light shines through the negative, shining through the dark areas, which now remember is going to be the center point, right? That bright light in the center, shining through there, not much light or no light at all is going to go through it. So that means that center part of the paper will not be exposed, which means it is going to end up being white. The outer side, the outside of the image that was black in the original scene, is now white on the negative, or clear. The light is shining through there, hits the paper, burns it out, burns up all the silver, creates all the silver, which comes up to a point where it becomes black. So much silver that it becomes black. So that is the process of reversing it. So the reason that I go through all of this, the reason that I explain all of this, is to understand where you're going to see the silver in your image, in your print. If you have pure white, there's not going to be any silver there, right? This silver conversion process has not actually happened. If you go to the pure black, while there is a lot of silver in there, there's so much that it has effectively, I like to call it the event horizon of silver halide, where you've got too much silver and you no longer see the silver. It's all blocking up on top of itself. And so it just becomes black. So you've got pure white to beautiful, rich, dark blacks, but the gray tones in between is where all the silver is. And depending on the paper and a bunch of other variety of factors, the majority of that silver is going to be in those midtones, probably in the mid to slightly darker grays, and that's where you're going to really start to see it. So keeping that in mind when you're looking at a photo that you're converting to black and white, if you have things in that, the more stuff you have in that mid-tone range, the more you're going to see the silver. And the more contrast you have, where you have black, white, and then the midtones in between, you're going to have that contrast between no silver white, no silver black, and the silvery stuff. So I hope that was really interesting. I had a lot of fun kind of preparing for this, but it was fun to go through that and to kind of prepare that lecture for you. So again, hopefully that was interesting. With all of that in mind, now let's make an image. So now that we know that we really want to focus on those midtones. So I'm going back into the filter here. So everybody back to the screen if you're not looking at that. And I have in here these black and white presets, which I've clicked on a couple of them already. A lot of these are pretty kind of grungy looking. There's, effects and lens flares and things like that on them. None of these presets are just a straight, pure black and white conversion. So my first step, the first thing that I want to show you in here is how to create your own preset. We're going to create one that is essentially just a neutral black and white so that I can build my image from that. If you are using Silver Efex Pro, then you would probably you would be starting with a neutral black and white image, but since we're starting in Analog Efex Pro, we are not doing that. Now, one of the reasons we might want to use Analog Efex Pro instead of Silver Efex Pro is for some of the light flare and more kind of edge effect and crunchy things that you can do in here. So we'll take a look at some of those as well, because those are some of the effects that we do have in here, but we want to start with the basics. So to do that, I'm going to create my own custom preset, which basically is called a camera. So we'll go down here, it says build a camera kit. I open this up and I've got in here already applied a basic adjustments, dirt and scratches, lens vignette, film type, frames, and levels and curves. I want to get rid of all of the special effecty stuff. Get rid of it. So dirt and scratches, let's get rid of it. I hit minus, and when I hit the minus here, you'll see it disappears over here on the right. Lens vignetting I want, film type I want, frames I do not want. So let's get rid of frames. Okay, so 4 adjustments: basic, lens, vignetting, film type, and levels and curves. That's what I'm going to start with. Now I need to reset all of these back to their default settings. So over on the right, you go to basic adjustments, and let's just reset everything here. Let me move my window over a little bit. There we go. Double click on these, they will reset to their default. Most sliders default is 0, but not all of them. So we'll see that when we get to one of them. Just double clicking on all of these, so these all now say 0. Okay, great. Excuse me, we're done resetting that one. I'll go to lens vignetting. This one, if I double click on amount, it actually sets it to -40. That's its default position. So I'm gonna have to drag this to 0 because that's where I want that to be. I don't want any lens vignetting applied yet, but I do want it there and available at all times. Under film type, we're actually gonna come back to that because there's a lot of different things we can do in film type. We'll come back to that in a moment. I will go to levels and curves and make sure that that is all neutral, and it is. Nothing's been applied there. Okay, so the entire look that we're seeing right here is applied under film type. Under the film type category, you'll see there are a variety of film types, including warm, cool, subtle, black and white neutral, and black and white toned. And under that, there's all these different little color tabs. And it don't tell you that it's mimicking any particular type of film. It's not saying, oh, it's AG for this or Kodak that. They're just different film types that are kind of generically created in here. And all of these have these tones on them, but I don't want to do tones. I want to do straight, pure black and white. I had mentioned earlier that if you do want to do a toned print, let's say you want to do a sepia picture, and you're doing a silver halide print, don't do the sepia toning here, do a straight black and white, and then the lab will do the sepia there. That's actually a chemical process. It's the final stage, or one of the final stages of making the print. It goes through a bath that gives it that sepia look. The sepia look is that kind of brown look to it. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to go to the black and white neutral. These tabs all look identical, but as I click on them, you'll see that there are different effects on the images. And again, none of these say neutral or no effect, but I found that the very first one, the top left corner here, number 1, is the most neutral look. Now this is still not completely neutral, because if I scroll down a little bit, you'll see that there is a slider here, neutral to faded. It has faded the blacks. I don't want those faded. I want them pure as they originally were, so I'm going to take that all the way down. Strength I'm going to take down to 0 as well, although it doesn't make any effect yet here, but we're taking it down to 0. Grain per pixel, very important to understand. Grain per pixel is not one that you want to set to 0. If I set this all the way down, the lowest setting is actually 1, not 0. And if you think about the name grain per pixel, this makes sense. We don't want 1 grain per pixel. We want so much grain per pixel that you can't even see it, which is effectively what happens if you go all the way up. If you take this all the way up to 500, it is effectively no grain being added to the image. The image is as clean as it came in from Photoshop. So that's where we want it to be. And then the soft and hard is for the grain. Since we've zeroed out the grain, it's not visible. Okay, so now I've got a neutral image. If I do a compare up here, back to the original color, you can see that the tones are not changing, see the black levels are not changing, the white levels are not changing. We are simply looking at a neutral grayscale version of the photo. Great, now that I've built this, I need to save it because I'm gonna want this later. So down here under custom presets, I click the little plus, and I'm gonna call this generic black and white, hit okay, and there we go. So now at any point, I can click on that and it's going to just give me a nice clean black and white starting point. All right, so now that we've done that, let's start playing with the image a little bit. Now I said earlier that when you're making the image for black and white print, that we talked about the black, the totally dark black areas are going to be pure black and the totally white areas are going to be pure white. And any texture that gets too high into the tonal range, too high towards bright, is going to disappear. You're just not going to see it. And it's a little bit harder to ensure that you aren't getting into any kind of illegal zones in here because you only have levels, and that's the histogram right here that we're looking at. However, if you were using Silver Efex Pro, and this is another webinar that I'm going to be doing, I think it's at the very end of this month. If you're using Silver Efex Pro, there is built in a monitor for the zone system, following the zone system. That is the Ansel Adams zone system way of checking your exposure. It is fabulous, it is incredibly powerful, and I will go into that in a future session. We don't have the zone system here in Analog Efex Pro, so we are going to be using just the histogram. Now what that means to us is looking at the histogram just in the event you've never seen a histogram before. Very quickly here on the right hand side you have pure white. This wall here is pure white. On the left hand side we have pure black, and then it's all the shades of grays in between. This image, I can see that there is a gap between the end of the data and the wall, if you will. So I know that nothing in my image here is pure white, which is good because nothing in my image should be pure white. There's nothing here that would be pure white. The only thing that should be pure white would be an actual light shining into the lens, a specular highlight off of a chrome bumper, that kind of a thing. Even snow should not be pure white because you're going to lose all the texture from it. So certainly skin should not. Skin is usually quite a bit darker. Now her skin is particularly bright. She's very, very pale. She's got makeup on to be even more pale. So we are going to leave her skin tone quite bright, but you want to watch this histogram. You do not want to go too bright or you will just completely lose all texture in her skin. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind in there. I feel like there's something else I was going to tell you about that. If I remember it, I will come back to it, but maybe not. Okay, let's start adjusting the image. So I'm going to start with the film type. I've got a neutral image in here. Now it's time to start playing with it. What do I want this to look like? I might want it to be looking just like a straight pure black and white on here, but let's have some fun with it. So I'm just going to start clicking through different presets in here to see what they load up. And you'll notice that at first nothing's happening because remember I took my neutral, or rather my strength, and I set it to 0. So let's get the strength up a little bit. Well, actually, we can take it all the way up to 100 to really see the effect. And now as I click on each one of these, we start to see more of what it's going to look like. Different presets, different effects here are going to look different on different images. It's not like I can say, oh, second row down, number 2, that's the best one. It's always going to depend on your photo. Is it a landscape? Is it a portrait? Is it a building? Is it food? They're always going to be different. So you just kind of got to play with them. Again, these aren't named. These aren't there's no guidelines in here. You just play with them until you find one that you like. Some of these have film grain applied to them as well, which is pretty cool. But you just keep looking around. And there was one in here that I quite liked. It was very, very bright, maybe a little bit too bright, but I quite like that. Like her eyes are really, really dark and almost a little bit spooky looking in here. So I think we're going to go with that one. But it is a little bit too bright, so let's take the strength down a little bit on that whole effect there. Pretty good. And my blacks, do I want my blacks to be super, super dark rich like that? Well, if wrong slider. No, that was right. If I take the slider that says neutral up to faded, we can see how it's going to start fading up the blacks. And look at couple of things. First, look at the screen image here, and you can see how this black is no longer black. It's got a little bit of a gray to it. But the only way that I really, really know is to look at the histogram. So look down here at the histogram. There's a huge gap in here from the darkest pixels in here to pure black, which is all the way on the left. So I really have that gap in there, and I really want to make sure that I am hitting that pure black, but I also don't want to just crunch any extra data in there. So I can do this two ways. I can either keep adjusting this. I'm kind of carefully watching the histogram as I'm dragging this down. And so I'm adjusting the levels via this neutral to faded effect. Or a more precise way to do this would be to use curves. That's going to be my preference. So I'm going to take this back to neutral, and I'm going to open up the level in curves. And I'm going to do this using the curves in here. I'm going to take a quick look at the questions before I move on. Brad asked, does it matter the order of stacking the adjustments? So that's a great question, Brad. Thank you. In this app, in this plugin, it does not. They're automatically ordered in their optimal sequence. So if I, for example, went into cameras in here, let's, I've already got my camera kit open, and I add, let's see here on the left, see this is zoom and rotate blur. I'm going to add that, and it is automatically going to get added between basic adjustments and lens vignetting, the same position that it is here. So this order on the left dictates the order on the right. Other tools that we have in here, Color Efex Pro comes to mind. That order is completely customizable, and it makes a huge difference how you order things. But in this particular plugin, it does not. Thank you very much. That's a great question. Bob is asking a question that says, well, you might want more grain if you're trying to imitate a pushed photo. No, fair enough. Sure, if you want your photo to look like you are doing a push process, so pushing and pulling is a process done in chemicals where you would shoot a film that's, let's say it was shot at 200 or it was 200 ISO film, but you shot it at 800. When you gave it to the developer, you tell them to pull the film so that it had that different process. Was that a push? It's been so long, I forgot the order. Anyway, chemical process. Yes, you often end up with more grain for that look. So yes, you absolutely could in there. Or personally, I'm a big fan of adding grain simply because I don't like the super clean digital look that most digital files have. I like having a little bit of texture to it. It's a very personal thing, but I like that. Okay, so that was the last question there. So again, get your questions in and I'll get to them as we go. So where was I? I was going into curves. So I was talking about how this black here is really dark. I want to make sure that I do have pure black, but I'm not throwing away any extra data. So I'm just going to grab the bottom of my curves here and start lifting that up to make sure that I'm not losing any data. And if I look down, I'm going to get my head out of screen here. I'm looking really close at my screen. I'm barely going to move it. Oops, see, too much already. Barely going to move it. And I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap in there. So the darkest black is maybe not super pure black. And actually, I think I might raise it up a little bit more even. And I think for this picture, it's because her hair is so dark that it's kind of blending into the background there. And I don't want to lose it completely. So here we can see some difference in there. If I want to take the darker blacks, but not the pure blacks, and make them a little bit darker, I can pull the curve down, or I can go the other way and lift it up. So now that I've done that, this might actually be a better route. Let me pull the point back down so that my background is pure black again, and lift up just the darker tones in there. Now we're getting somewhere. I actually kind of like that. So now I can see her hair there is standing out against the background a little bit more. Now her skin is really bright, and that is part of what I want, but it's a little bit too much. So I'm going to take the curve here, the highlight curve, and I'm going to pull that down just a hair as well. So you can see in here what I've done is I have basically forced these shadows up a little bit, pulled the highlights back down. It's kind of a reverse S-curve. Usually in an S-curve, you would make the shadows darker, the highlights brighter. I've done a bit of the reverse here to flatten this out a little bit. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. We go back into film type, and just for was it Bob? That was right, Bob that asked for it. I'm going to add some grain in there. So let's go ahead and take the grain down a bit. Now, whenever you're doing grain, it's a good idea to zoom into 100%. If you're not looking at the image at 100%, you don't really know what your grain is going to look like. Incidentally, with that said, let me add one more caveat to that. This file, we're going to assume that I'm going to be printing this file. So yes, I want to look at the grain here at 100% as it is. But let's just say that my goal with this picture is to upload it on Instagram. In that case, I have two different ways, two different approaches for looking at the grain that I'm going to apply. Looking at the grain at 100% isn't going to help me because nobody else is going to see the image this way. So in that case, I actually do want to look at it zoomed out. But if I wanted to be really accurate about it, I would not apply the grain yet. I would go back into Photoshop or Lightroom, wherever you are, and export an image at the size that I'm going to upload to Instagram, which is the maximum size is 1350 by 1080. I would bring that file back into the filter and add my grain to that. And at that point, go ahead and look at it 100%. But that way you're ensuring that the grain that you're adding is going to be visible as you intended it at its final size. If I take this file and I scale it down, let's say I apply the grain as it is, and I scale it down for Instagram, a lot of that grain is going to disappear. So very important. Those kind of texture details, same thing with sharpening, you want to do at the final size. Okay, so back into that. Now that I've said that, let's go back in. We're looking at the picture here. Let's take a little bit of grain onto it. And I quite like a bit of heavy grain. So I'm gonna probably about there. I like it soft. If I bring it up high, bring it up to hard rather, you can start to see you can see the definition of the grain a little bit more. The darker pixels and the whiter pixels are farther apart, like the darker gets darker, the whiter gets whiter. Yeah, but I don't want it to be too harsh, so I'm gonna actually leave it back to soft. I quite like that. Okay, looking pretty good in there. All right, next, let's go into our basic adjustments. Now, this particular image at this point, I don't need to do any basic adjustments as far as brightness and contrast. There is this interesting one called detail extraction. So let's see what happens if I play with that. If I start to play with that, it's quite interesting. It is actually adding some micro contrast into the midtones, which is further brightening up her hair, which is kind of good, separating that from the background a little bit. But if I take this too high, I'm going to exaggerate it a bit. You'll see that her skin has gotten too bright. Her eyes are washed out. It's like this kind of weird thing has happened. So I definitely don't want to go too high, but I do like what it's doing to her hair. So with that in mind, instead of applying detail extraction to the whole image, I'm going to apply it just to her hair. And we're going to do that using control points. Now, if you're not familiar with control points yet, I'm going to give you a brief story on these guys. Control points are a way of applying an effect to a very specific part of the image, kind of like a radial gradient or a linear gradient would, except that it is not based off of simply a radius around a point or a line. It is based off of the actual area that you click on. The software creates a mask in real time based off of the luminance, that's the brightness, and the chrominance, the color, in this case it's just going to be luminance, of the image that you have clicked on, of the pixels that you have clicked on. And it creates that mask in real time. And you can see this right away. So I'm going to go ahead and add a control point, and I'll just add one to her hair. And you can change the size of it. So this is kind of how far outside of that circle it's going to look for the data to mask. And then if I click on this little icon here, it's a tiny little guy underneath this little box. Click on that checkbox and it shows me what it has selected. Now, because this is such a dark image, her hair has been selected, her skin has not, but look at how much of the background has been selected there. So I'm going to have to be a little bit more judicious with this. And in fact, what I might also need to do is add some protection control points on there. I think I'm not going to have to. Oh, no, I am going to have to on her eye. So let's see what happens. Let's turn off the mask. I'm going to take that detail extraction and bring it up, and you can see what it's doing to her hair in there. But you can also see, let's bring it up really far so it's really obvious. Look at what's happened to her eye in there. Because that mask has included her eye, it has done some weird stuff to her eye, which I really don't want. So let's zoom in a little bit closer in here. And first of all, this is just way too much, so I'll bring that down a bit. I'm going to add another control point onto her eye. And this control point, I'm not going to do anything to. And by not doing anything to it, it effectively acts as a protection mask, keeping the effect of this other control point from exposing this one. So I'll click on that, and you can see right away that her eye area got darker. Let's make this smaller. I really only want to affect her eye in there. And if I view that mask, that is what's being affected in there. But the real thing that I need to see is this mask. Come back here. The original one, there we go. That's the original mask. And now I can see what's being canceled by this one. So I move this over, and sure enough, there I have now canceled out her eye. Pretty cool, very powerful way to work in here. I love it. Okay, so let's turn that off, and I've zoomed back out of here. I have adjusted the detail on her hair, which actually I think works out pretty well. Maybe I want to add some contrast into her blouse. It's looking a little bit faded and white in there, so let's just add another control point down to here, make this bigger, bring the contrast up a little bit, and there we go. You can see we're getting a little bit more contrast in there. Her skin's getting darker, the white on the dress is getting brighter, so now we're gonna have some really nice contrast in there. Super. Okay, I like it. Let's just do this one. I'm gonna hit OK, exit out of this. This brings us back to Photoshop, where it has applied the effect. Now, because this is a smart object, that means that this is a smart filter, which means I can double click on the filter name right here. It brings me right back into where I left it, and I can make further adjustments to this at any time. So this is the power of doing these smart objects. It's going to take a moment to render that out. While that's thinking, let's take a quick look at any other questions. Bob is asking, is the protection control point order dependent? No, it doesn't matter what order you put them in. It's simply perhaps a better way to think about it to make it a little easier is that every control point is independent, and they basically do battle against each other. You can even compensate. Let's just say that you set up your control points, one on the hair, one on the eye, and you're still getting too much detail hitting, in this case, the detail extraction, hitting the eye. I could go into the control point that's on the eye and do a little negative detail extraction, and it will counteract the original one. So different ways to work with it, but effectively they are battling each other out, and the way to see what is actually being affected is to go through those masks. Okay, let's cancel this. And I'm back in here. So, and again, I have the original, right? If I turn this off, I've got the original color one underneath. Now, at this point, if I was going to print this thing, I would want to make sure that I was sending the right print size to my printer. If you look at one of the FAQs on those 2 print sites that I showed you, they tell you, one of those pages tells you to send a file optimally, ideally, that is 300 dpi at the file size that you want to print. So if I go up here and I say image size, what have I got? Remember, this is a cropped image here. So I'm looking at 300 dpi, a 10 by 12 image. So I can print 10 by 12, no problem in here. If I was going to make it a little smaller, let's say I wanted to do an 8 by 12. So the height is 12.74. If I just type in 12 there, because resampling is not turned on, it has simply recalculated the sizes, and now I have a 318 pixel image. I don't want that. I actually want it to be straight 300. So I'm going to go ahead and let it resample, type in 300 there, and now I've got exactly 300 by 12. And then to get the 8, I'm going to have to crop the image. So, but just keep that in mind. When you're sending it off to the printer, you do want to send that. Now, let's say that you wanted to do something bigger and you don't have the pixels to do it. I definitely advise talking to the printer and asking them the best way to handle it. Some printers will tell you to just send them the file and they will do the upresing. Some printers will tell you that their printer will do the interpolation, and that does the best job. Some of them will tell you that you have to do the interpolation, and if you have to do it, you can certainly do it in Photoshop, but I'm not going to get into a whole thing on how to do this best right now, but just Google search how to upres files. There's a lot of different techniques. There's actually software dedicated for it that you can buy, but even within Photoshop, if you're going to go, let's say, a full 100% increase, so 100, double the width, double the height, so it's a 400% data increase, then they recommend doing it in steps as opposed to doing it all at once. So research it a little bit if that's something you have to do. But again, first thing is going to be to talk to your printer and see how they want to handle it. Super, super important that you do that. Every printer is different. Talk to your printer. Okay, last thing. We got 15 minutes left. I got another file that I wanted to show you. Let me close this one here. Open a new file, and we're opening a raw file. We're going to make sure that we are looking at the default in here. Let me just hit reset on this. Yep, and that's the one we're going to work with. Real quick, jump over to the questions in here. Anything else? Diana says, why can't I achieve the same results in Silver Efex Pro? You absolutely can. From what we've done so far, you can. What we're going to do next is adding some other fun effects to it that aren't in Silver Efex Pro. All depends on what you want to do. This particular session is about working with Analog Efex Pro. John Keller, can one clone the controls as with the original Knit Collection example to get the same effect on both eyes? You can option drag a control point, and that will duplicate it with all of its settings intact. Okay. Very quickly, we're in camera raw. I just want to do some basic adjustments to this. I'm actually going to hit the auto button. If I can find it, there it is. Hit the auto button. There it is. And that's great. There's a good separation between the subject and the background. I quite like that. Maybe I could make these a little bit brighter in the highlights. So I'm going to go up to the histogram. I'm going to do this really easy way. If you've never seen this, this is so cool. Go up to the histogram and literally click and drag on the histogram. I'll say this part of the image I want to be brighter. This part of the image I want to be darker. The midtones I want overall to be a little brighter. The highlights I want to be brighter still. It's kind of a neat little thing. Watch out that you don't clip. You can see in here I'm getting a little clipping warning. Don't want to clip. Definitely don't want to clip. Shadows I could probably bring down a little bit. Neat. Okay, so now it's a nice contrasty image. Colors aren't very good, but I'm converting it to black and white, so I don't care. There's an open image button. If you hold down the shift key, it turns to open object. This is that really critical point of maintaining this as a smart object, meaning I can go back into the raw editor at any time. I personally like having that ultimate flexibility in my workflow, so awesome. Click on open object. You get there by holding down the shift key, the button changes to open object, and away we go. All right, that's it. Let's do it. Let's take this picture into Analog Efex Pro. All right. For this one, we're going to go through some of the black and white presets again, and we're going to look really carefully, watch very carefully his skin tone against the background. So a lot of the presets are going to kind of bring them, the way that adjust the levels, his face is going to blend into the background quite badly. Like this one's not super bad, but he's a little bit blended in there. So I'm going to, I'm going to go very quickly through these different presets. Now that one's separated pretty nicely, and see which one of these looks pretty good. And that's just one of those things to keep in mind. I want to make sure that I'm not losing my face in this particular photo against the background in there. That one's a little bit too much. Let's see here. I don't remember which one I had used when I was getting ready for the show. I forgot which one I liked, but we'll just grab one of these. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to go for this one actually, because there is nice separation on there. We can see his face against the background pretty clearly, and we've got some other cool effects going on. So this is the kind of stuff that we may not be doing inside of Silver Efex Pro. There is some film, scratchy, grainy stuff going on in here. Let's maybe do a little bit more. Let's go into the camera kit and let's start adding some other things to it. Like let's add a light leak to this. It's definitely got that kind of antiquated look to it. Let's add some light leaks into this one, see if we get some cool lens flares going. They're pretty subtle. A lot of these light leaks do depend on color to really show off what they can do. But as you load these light leaks, you can see kind of different tones changing around the image. And as you drag this center point here, it's the center of that light leak. The light leak is basically an image that is being composited on top of here to give you these different looks. You can play with these different effects in here and see if there's anything in there that you like. Let's also do, what else are we doing here? It's a little, this one's already got some good motion blur in the background. Probably don't need to do that. Let's do a double exposure. Why not? It's another fun effect in here. So this double exposure, automatically by default, it is loading up the same image. And so I can actually go in here and click and drag to move the second version of that picture around. And so you can start to see where you're getting kind of the double effect in there. I can change the intensity of that. I can actually twist it and rotate it and get some like really weird twisty things going on. It's kind of a fun effect, honestly. I really enjoy this one. It's kind of fun to play with. Let's see in here. It's good. Yeah, there we go. There's some of that doubling back in there. Kind of a fun thing to play with. Okay, cool. I'm digging that. Let's do a little bit with control points. Let me go back into the basic exposure, and his shirt on there, I feel like it's gotten too bright. His face is a bit too bright. It's kind of blending into the background a bit. So let's do a control point. Let's add one on his shirt to start and take the brightness down on that. And again, if we want to see exactly what is being affected in here, we can look at the mask and you can see exactly what's being affected. So I might at this point want to move this around and try and find a position to drop it on where it's affecting just the shirt. So like here, that's bad. It's affecting the background too much. Get it up to around there. It's pretty good. It's pretty good, just the shirt. Ooh, that was good. Yeah, there we go. Call it right there. That's what I'm going to do. So there, I'm really affecting just that part of the shirt. So darken that a little bit. Nice. I'm going to do another one on his face. So let's add that control point to his face. This one's going to need to be pretty small on there. Again, we're going to look at the mask. That's actually pretty good. It has pretty much hit his face. Let's zoom in closely to this. See if there's a better position for it. Right about so. Nope, too much background. Ooh, there. I almost had it. There, I like it. Now I'm also going to add another control point to the background and try and protect his face a little bit more. Yeah, look at how easy that was. One click and it has protected his face with this one. Now it's almost too chunky in there, but let's see what happens. Now with that, let's hide the mask. With that selected, I'm going to, since the background's quite dark, I could try, or quite bright rather, could try darkening his face. No, that's not going to work. Let's do this. Let's brighten his face. Not too much. We're getting that chunkiness coming through. And then I'm also going to take the background and darken that a little bit. Kind of separate that out. There we go. That's looking pretty good. Okay, cool. So, you know, it's a process, right? It's a process. So let's say at this point, I'm happy with what I've got here. I'm digging my control points. I like the whole look, but I go, man, you know what? This picture would be so much cooler if it was cropped square. If this picture was cropped square, it'd be perfect. But I can't just render this and then crop it square because I'll lose all my cool edges on here. So that's no good. So what I want to do is save the work that I've just done. The thing is, I've done control points. I've added control points. Now, usually when you save a preset, you don't save the control points because control points are very specific to that image. You don't want to save the control points because they don't make sense on other photos. In this case, I want to apply it to the same photo, so I need the control points saved. Well, here's a neat little trick. I'm going to go over here to the custom menu and I'm going to hit plus to save this preset. I'm just going to call this bike and I'm going to say no CPs, no control points. This is my default way of doing it. Okay. Now I'm going to save another one. And this time I'm going to hold down the shift key. Here's the real secret part of this. There is no indication that anything is different. No indications anything is happening. But if I hold down the shift key on the keyboard, when I click plus, it is now going to save the control points. Again, there's no dialogue confirming this. It's like a little secret thing you have to know. So now I'm going to say bike with CP and hit OK. And now that one is going to have those control points built into it. Okay, I'm going to cancel out of here. I need to crop this image square. Remember last time I have to render it first, so I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to convert that to, rasterize that. There we go. I'm going to bring up the crop tool. Let's go to a square and let's center his bike right in the center of the square. I'm going to go ahead and let it delete the cropped pixels, hit OK, and let's just verify it, move this around. Yep, that's all I've got is that part of it. Now I can go back into the filter and apply the presets. Now here's the thing, those control points aren't necessarily going to line up with the image, are they? Because the image is a different aspect ratio now, but that's okay. The control points are there. We can move them back into place. So it's not a flawless execution because I've cropped it, but had I not cropped it, let's just say that, I don't know, this is something else I wanted to do to it, I can do that. So, all right, let's see here. That's applied. Oh, it just rendered it out. That wasn't what I wanted. Let's go back into the filter itself. Here we go. And open up custom. Still loading. Let's see if there's any other questions while that's happening. No other questions. Excellent. We're going to end right on time. Go to custom. So there's the original one, bike no CP. So let's load that one up first. And we're going to get the look. The border is going to now fit within that square. It's all going to look fantastic. Yep, good. See, I got my borders on there, but there's no control points. Now let's load the one with the control points. You can see the image has changed, and look, there's my control points. They're just in the wrong place. So now I just need to go in here and move them over. So it's basically going to be right about there. And of course, I should probably go into the mask view to really determine that I've got them in the right spot. But that is effectively what I'm going to do. So I can save those control points. And for the gentleman that asked, if I now hold down the Option key, you see how it changed, the cursor changes to a little plus. I can drag this over, and it has now cloned that control point. So now I have two of the same ones. If I want to get rid of one, just select it and hit the delete key, and away it goes. And that's that. So this image, let's see here, I got 4 minutes left. If I was going to be making that silver print with this, I definitely want to have some darker blacks on here. So I'm going to go as a final step to my levels and curves. I'm going to pull that down a little bit. I want some good dark areas in there. Watching my histogram here, I don't want to go, I don't want to lose anything in the blacks, but I do want to have some rich blacks in there. So I would probably print it, let's say right about there. I'd still play with the face a little bit. It's not done yet, but yeah, that's probably how I'd print it. And that'd be a beautiful silvery print. All right, guys, that is everything that I wanted to show you today. Last chance to get any last questions in here. If there's anything else you want, drop it into the comments. I'll remind you that there is, in about a day, 24 hours from now, you'll get an email with a link to this video so you can rewatch the video at any time. Don't forget about the links that I dropped into the chat. Grab those 4 links just for more education about the silver and especially on how to print if you're going to print these. And again, that's kind of the whole point of this, right? If you're going to go through the trouble of making this image for print, then you got to print it because you're never going to see the silver coming off of an inkjet printer. It's got to be done in a chemical process, and it is remarkable how beautiful it looks. If you've never done one before, I think they're as cheap as like $15. It's worth doing. It's just worth doing because it's so much fun. Let's see here. Bob says, do the filters take advantage of multi-core CPUs? Ooh, that is a question I don't know the answer to. So any question that I don't know the answer to, there's that one, or anything you think of later for all of you that you want to ask later, you go, oh, I should have asked that. Hit me up on social media. PhotoJoseph, absolutely everywhere. Twitter is the best for this sort of thing. Just hit me up on Twitter, say, hey, at PhotoJoseph, blah, 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 what's my question? Including Bob, I would very much appreciate it if you would tweet your question to me so that I can then loop in DxO and ask them, because I don't know the answer to that question and I would love to find out. I just don't know. So yeah, if you could tweet that to me, that would be great. Again, everybody, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. I post a lot of lovely pictures on Instagram, and I've got a YouTube channel, youtube.com/PhotoJoseph. If you like education like this, I'm doing stuff like this in hardware and software all the time on the YouTube channel. So please come check that out, subscribe, hit the little bell, you know the routine. And other than that, thanks a bunch for tuning in today. I know I was moving fast for a lot of you. Sorry about that. Hopefully I managed to slow down a little bit there. And you enjoyed it. Hope you like. Let me know if you enjoyed the education on the silver part of it. I was really debating whether I should include that or not, but I thought it'd be a good part of it. Let me know real quick what you thought of that. And that's it. All right, guys. Hey, thanks a bunch for tuning in. I super appreciate it. See you later.